I'm Eleanor, and I've been a doctor for almost as long as I've been married to Richard. We've had our share of good and bad times, but those 30 years went by quickly. Our big, comfy house was always lively, especially when our sons, James and Oliver, were young. They were very different from each other, but each brought their own special happiness into our lives. Richard and I both worked hard as doctors to create a nice life for ourselves. Over the years, we bought a few apartments and rented them out for extra money. Everything seemed to be going well until one day when Richard came home looking very pale and serious. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he said, sounding very worried as he put his medical bag down. "I had some tests done last week and the results. It's cancer." The months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, treatments, and long waits. Richard fought hard, but the cancer was ruthless. Watching the strongest person I knew suffer like that was incredibly painful. No amount of medical knowledge could prepare me for it. One evening, while we were sitting quietly in the living room, Richard took my hand and said, "Eleanor, if things don't go well, make sure everything is taken care of for the boys. The will is all set. You'll be fine with money." Not long after, Richard passed away. His funeral was very sad. Family, friends, and colleagues came from far and wide to say their goodbyes, but what really got to me was the silence at home after everyone left. Seeing the empty spots where Richard used to be and his belongings just as he left them was heart-wrenching. A few days after the funeral, I was in the kitchen trying to sort out leftover food when James burst in, looking worried and angry. Oliver followed him, looking uncomfortable. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will," James said, getting straight to the point. I sighed and put down the cling film. "Yes, I know. Your father left everything to me. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of." James slammed his hand on the counter. "But what about me and Oliver? We're his sons. It's not right that we get nothing." Oliver tried to calm things down. "James, let's not argue right now. Mom is still grieving. We can figure this out without fighting." James glared at Oliver. "It's easy for you to say. You're not thinking about the future." "I am." I leaned against the counter, feeling the pressure of their looks. "Your father and I built everything together. He trusted me to take care of things. But I hear you, James. I don't want to leave you out." "So what now?" James said, crossing his arms and raising his voice. "Do we just wait until you decide it's time to give us our share?" "James, watch your tone," I said, losing my patience. "I am still your mother." Oliver stepped between us, raising his hands like he was trying to break up a fight. "Let's all calm down. This isn't helping." "Mom, maybe we can find a compromise," Oliver suggested. I nodded and rubbed my temples. "Here's what we can do. The apartments that your father and I invested in downtown." James interrupted. "Yes, those." I gave him a look to signal him to be quiet for a moment. "I was thinking you each take one. You can live in them or rent them out. I'll also give each of you $225,000 to help you get started." James was clearly calculating in his head. "And the rest, the house, the money, will stay with me for now. When I'm gone, it'll come to you. As for your father's wishes," I said firmly, "James, this is fair. I know you want to argue more," but Oliver nudged him. "Let's think about this. Mom isn't leaving us with nothing." James finally nodded, though he looked upset. "Fine, but I want this in writing. No more surprises." "Of course," I agreed. "We'll get everything documented properly." As they left the kitchen, I heard Oliver whispering to James, "Give Mom a break. She's doing her best." James muttered something I couldn't hear and didn't really want to. As I washed the dishes, I wondered if Richard could see us and what he'd think. I hoped I was making the right decisions, but only time would tell. And time, as always, was unpredictable. On a sunny afternoon, which was a rare but pleasant change, James brought Isabella over to meet me for the first time. They hadn't been dating long, but James was clearly smitten. You could tell by how he was fussing over her, which was unlike him. When they walked in, Isabella immediately had an air of confidence, almost like she owned the place. Dressed up in fancy clothes, she strolled into the living room with hardly a greeting, her eyes taking in everything. "Nice place you've got here," she said, flipping her hair back and sitting down without waiting for an invitation. James was beside her, grinning like he'd won the lottery. I tried to be a good host and forced a smile. "Thank you, Isabella. Would you like anything to drink? Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee sounds lovely," she replied. Then turned to James. "Make sure it's black, no sugar." James nodded and went to the kitchen, leaving me alone with her. I felt like a guest in my own living room. The silence was uncomfortable until she broke it. "So James tells me you're pretty well off," she said, looking at the decor. "I'm used to a certain standard, you know. My parents made sure of that." "That's good to hear," I replied, not sure what else to say. James came back with the coffee and handed Isabella her cup. She took a sip and made a face. It's all right. Anyway, we've been talking about our future and planning ahead." That's wise, I said, looking at James, hoping he'd give me a hint about where this conversation was going. Isabella put her cup down. Speaking of planning, we're thinking about the wedding. I want something special, as James has probably told you. I found this place that would be perfect for the rehearsal dinner, but it's a bit expensive, about $30,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. $30,000 just for the rehearsal dinner. James quickly jumped in. Mom, it's important to Bella. We want to start things off right. I set my cup down, feeling frustrated. That's a lot of money for just a dinner, Isabella. We need to be more reasonable. Isabella's expression turned cold. Reasonable? James says you have the means. I don't see why we should compromise on something this important. James nodded along, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. He knew this request was excessive. I'm all for celebrating, I said, trying to stay calm, but $30,000 for a rehearsal dinner is way too much. I can't justify that. Isabella stood up, her chair scraping loudly. I'm not used to lowering my standards, Eleanor. I made it clear to James that I expect a certain lifestyle. James tried to mediate. Mom, maybe we can find a compromise. There's no compromise on $30,000 for a dinner, James. That's final. I snapped, losing my patience. Isabella grabbed her purse and glared at me. Fine. If that's how it's going to be, then maybe we need to rethink some things. They left shortly after, and I was left feeling shaken by the encounter. The nerve of Isabella to come into my home, drink my coffee, and dictate how I should spend my money. It felt like a slap in the face and a wake-up call I wasn't prepared for. While I was at the grocery store, James and Isabella decided to drop by again. When I got home, Oliver was awkwardly trying to keep them entertained in the living room. The tension was palpable, the kind that makes you want to turn around and leave, but it was my house, so I braced myself and walked in. Isabella, as flashy as ever, handed me a list as soon as I set down my grocery bags. Eleanor, we thought a lot about the wedding gifts, and here's what we've decided. I hope this will make things easier for you. I glanced at the list she gave me. It was surprisingly sensible: kitchen appliances, some nice china, and even a couple of pieces of furniture. This seems quite reasonable, I said, feeling a bit of relief. I think these are wonderful choices. James looked at Isabella with hope in his eyes. Just as I was about to talk about where we could buy the items on the first list, Isabella's expression suddenly changed. She gasped. Oh no, this isn't right. Give that back. She snatched the list from my hands and pulled out another piece of paper from her purse. Here's the real list. The new list was shocking. It included an apartment, a luxury car, an exclusive vacation, and even diamond jewelry. I couldn't believe my eyes. Is this some kind of joke? Isabella remained unfazed. No joke, Eleanor. These are the gifts we expect. Only the best for our wedding. I looked at her, then at James, hoping he would speak up or show that he didn't agree with this craziness. But he just stood there, looking torn but silent. I couldn't hold back. James, why are you letting her do this? You know this is unreasonable. Isabella interrupted, her voice rising. This doesn't concern you, Eleanor. You just need to pay up and stay quiet. That's when Oliver stood up, his face serious. That's enough, Isabella. You're not going to talk to our mom like that. This is her house, and you're way out of line. You need to leave now. The tension in the room was thick as James and Isabella gathered their things. Isabella muttered angrily, "This is ridiculous. We'll remember this." Then they left, slamming the door behind them. I sat down, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Oliver sat beside me and put an arm around my shoulders. We'll figure this out, Mom, but you can't let them bully you into giving more than you can or should. It's not right. He was right, of course, but as I sat there with my son, I worried about James. How had things gotten so out of hand? How could he not see what this was doing to our family? The silence that followed was filled with unspoken worries and fears about the future. I knew this wasn't over. Things were only going to get tougher from here. In the weeks that followed, James called constantly, each call more demanding than the last. His tone was desperate, almost frantic. "Mom, you don't understand. I can't look poor next to Bella's family," he'd argue, his voice breaking with stress. "You have the money. Why can't you just help me out?" I sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear, feeling a tight knot in my stomach. "James, it's not just about the money. It's about living within your means. Bella's expectations are unrealistic. You can't sustain that without going into serious debt." He'd scoff, frustration clearly boiling over. "What do you know about it? I'm not going to live like a... I need more from the inheritance now." "The offer stands," I said, trying to stay firm. "James, I've agreed to cover half the wedding costs, up to $115,000, and give a $5,000 gift. That's more than generous. Everything has to be agreed upon with me, though. No more surprises." There was a pause, then he laughed sharply. "That's nothing. You're just being stingy. You have $1 million sitting there." Why are you holding out on me?" "Because it's not just about the money," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "It's about not supporting a fantasy that will ruin you." He yelled so loudly that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I don't need this. I'll handle it my way. Forget you." And with that, the call ended abruptly. Months went by in silence. I tried to keep busy with daily routines, pushing thoughts of James to the back of my mind, but the calm didn't last long. One afternoon, the phone rang, and it was my sister-in-law, Anita. "Eleanor, I thought you should know," Anita said cautiously. "James is flying all the wedding guests to Hawaii. He sold his apartment to pay for it, and he expects you to make your own way there. He mentioned you weren't interested in helping." I hung up, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. How could he be so reckless? Before I could process it all, Oliver came into the room with a serious look on his face. "Mom, there's something you need to hear." I recorded their conversation when they were here. He handed me an audio recorder. I pressed play, and the voices of James and Isabella filled the kitchen. "James, your mom is just a nasty old woman with a fat wallet. We need to squeeze as much as we can out of her and then cut her off." James's voice came through chillingly clear. "Whatever it takes, Bella. I'm not going to let her control us. If it comes down to it, I'll kick her out in her underwear." I turned off the recorder, my hands shaking. Hearing my own son speak about me like that was unbearable. The room seemed to spin as I tried to grasp the full weight of his betrayal. Deciding to fly to Hawaii wasn't easy, but Oliver and I were determined to face whatever lay ahead. When we landed and approached the venue, I was overwhelmed by its extravagance. Flowers were everywhere, lights twinkled like stars across the evening sky, and music floated in the air. As we entered the gathering, I saw James and Isabella mingling with guests, looking like a picture-perfect couple with their smiles and laughter. It hurt to see my son so lost in this artificial world. Before I could move closer, Isabella spotted us. Her smile vanished, replaced by a scowl. She marched over, her high heels clicking sharply against the stone pathway. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed, stopping just inches from me. Her voice was loud enough to attract attention. "This is my day, and you're not welcome." I was taken aback, but before I could say anything, her parents, who had overheard, approached us. Her father, a tall, stern-looking man, spoke first. "Isabella, that's no way to speak to your guest, especially not to James's mother." Her father said sternly, his tone making Isabella's cheeks flush with embarrassment. Her mother, looking equally shocked, turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Eleanor, please come with us. Let's find you a place to sit." They guided us to a table at the edge of the setup, clearly an afterthought, with no proper setting. The ceremony soon began, but the speeches felt hollow given the tension. Then, unexpectedly, I was handed the microphone. I stood up, my legs shaky but my determination strong. "I came here today to wish my son and his new wife a happy future," I started, my voice steady despite my nerves. "But I also believe in honesty and integrity, qualities that have been missing from the events leading up to this day." Isabella's face went from pink to red, her eyes shooting daggers at me. I was asked for money time and again in amounts that no reasonable person would consider justifiable. When I couldn't meet these demands, I was threatened with separation from my family and future grandchildren. My voice cracked a bit, but I continued. Oliver, seeing my distress, stepped closer and placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. I nodded at him and then turned on the audio recording he had made. Isabella's voice filled the air, cold and calculating as she discussed how they planned to extract more money from me. James's voice agreed, saying he was prepared to leave me with nothing for his bride. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, filled with shock and disapproval. I turned off the recorder, the silence in the room heavy. I gave my son an apartment and $25,000, and it was still not enough. Today, I am making it clear, I will not be treated as an ATM or threatened. I am disowning James and Isabella. I wish them well, but from this day forward, I am choosing to remove myself from their lives. The reaction was immediate. Isabella screamed, her voice shrill and angry. "You've ruined my wedding. I curse you." Returning home was bittersweet. In the quiet of my house, I made a decision that even surprised me. I quit my job. After years of healing others as a doctor, it was time to focus on healing myself and rebuilding the life that had been torn apart. Oliver, bless his heart, had just graduated from art college and was brimming with ideas and ambition. With the $25,000 I had given him, he opened his own tattoo parlor. It wasn't just any shop. It quickly became a place where art and skin met in stunning displays. Oliver poured his heart into his work, and it paid off. He began entering tattoo contests, and soon his name was well known locally. Before long, he was opening more locations, creating a network of salons that became a hotspot for tattoo enthusiasts. I'd watch him sketch late into the night, his dedication a stark contrast to the chaos his brother had created. "You're doing amazing, Ollie," I'd say, feeling proud. During these calmer months, James reappeared one afternoon. He showed up at the door, looking tired and defeated, so different from the ambitious man he used to be. "Mom, I need to talk," he said, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. His voice was weary, a far cry from the demanding tone I was used to. I sighed and motioned for him to continue. "What is it, James?" "It's Bella. She's driving me insane. Nothing's ever enough. I got a second job, but it's still not enough for her." His voice was desperate, but it didn't erase the past. "James, I warned you. I told you living like that with someone like her wouldn't be sustainable." He rubbed his face, clearly frustrated. I know you warned me, but I thought—" His voice trailed off, replaced by a deep sense of hopelessness. "Thought what?" "That money would magically appear just because you wanted it to." My tone was sharp, hardened by years of frustration. "Look at your brother. He started with the same amount and built something of his own without stepping on anyone." James bristled. "Yeah, well, not everyone's like Oliver, are they? I have a right to the inheritance too, remember. And when you're gone, it'll come to me." That was the last straw. "Get out, James," I said firmly. "And don't come back, not this time. You chose your path." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might argue further. But instead he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. In the quiet that followed, Oliver came downstairs, having overheard the end of our conversation. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked softly. I nodded, wrapping my arms around Oliver. "I'm okay now, thanks to you. Let's focus on the good we can create and the life we can build together." He hugged me back, his presence a comforting reminder that not all was lost. In that moment, I felt that despite the heart-aches, the journey was still worthwhile. We had each other, and that was enough to keep moving forward. Once the storm with James had passed, our home settled into a peace I hadn't felt in years. During this calm period, Oliver introduced someone special, Sarah. She was everything Isabella wasn't: kind, humble, and genuinely caring. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened, and they soon announced their engagement. Unlike James's extravagant wedding, their ceremony was a simple, heartfelt event in our backyard. With flowers from the garden, homemade decorations, and a small group of close friends and family, the day was perfect. During the reception, I pulled Oliver aside. "You've chosen a wonderful woman," I said, my voice choked with emotion. He squeezed my hand and smiled. "I learned from the best," he replied, giving me a knowing look. Life moved quickly after that. They sold the apartment I had given Oliver, adding some of their savings to buy a small, cozy house just a few miles away. One sunny afternoon, while we were having tea in their new living room, Sarah shared some exciting news. "Eleanor, we're expecting twins," Sarah announced, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I nearly dropped my cup, overwhelmed with joy. "Twins? Oh my goodness, that's wonderful." Oliver beamed, his pride clear. "We wanted you to be the first to know. We're really happy, Mom." "Twins," I repeated, letting the words sink in. Grandchildren. It was a new chapter I was eager to embrace. As for James, news about him was rare. The last I heard, he had divorced Isabella. She had taken almost everything in the split, leaving him to start over in a different city. Despite the pain he had caused, it hurt to know he was out there struggling because of his choices. One evening, as I was looking through old photo albums, Oliver came and sat beside me. He noticed a picture of James and me from years ago. "Do you ever hear from him?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "No. After everything, he's chosen his path, and I have to respect that, even though it breaks my heart." Oliver put an arm around me. "He's still my brother, Mom. Maybe one day he'll come around." "Maybe," I agreed, though I wasn't entirely sure if I believed it. But for now, we had plenty to look forward to, especially with those twins on the way. Oliver chuckled. "Yeah, you're about to be the busiest grandma in town." We both laughed, the sound filling the room with warmth. Despite the past, the mistakes and heart-aches, this moment with Oliver felt like everything was exactly as it should be. Life was moving on, and so were we, with new hopes and dreams just on the horizon.